Oh, oh, oh. All right. Biruchim Habaim. Welcome. First of all, I appreciate you coming to class on our vacation. Um, Today, we're going to learn about Tu B'Av. Tu B'Av, generally regarded as the Jewish Valentine's Day or the Day of Love, Chag Ahava. But we're going to see that the origin of Tu B'Av is actually rooted in a very, very dark episode in early Jewish history. And first of all, we need to understand what is the relationship between Tu B'Av, the 15th of Av, and Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av. And we'll see that they're actually very deeply connected. All right, so we now commemorated last week Tisha B'Av, the ultimate, or to call it the climax of Tisha B'Av was the destruction of our temples, both first and second temples. Basically, it's the destruction of Judaism as a sovereign nation, destruction of our civilization. And we're going to see that too is really the how we rebuild from that situation. So let's first see what Tisha B'Av is, right? It says we're in Hilchot Ta'aniyot, laws of the fast days, the Ta'aniyot. It says there are certain fast days that you do for if it's a very dry year and no rain, so they do Ta'aniyot throughout the year. And it says that there are certain Ta'aniyot that all of Israel does. Everybody participates in. All right? And one of them is Tisha B'Av. We'll say even the worst of them, or the harshest of them. V'Tisha B'Av, Hamisha Devarim Ir'ubo. We commemorate Tisha B'Av for 5 things that happened on Tisha B'Av. Nigzara al Israel b'midbar shelo yikansu la'aretz. The first thing that we commemorate on Tisha B'Av is the decree from heaven, from God, that the Jewish people in the desert will not live to enter the land. Those people who came out of Egypt, who were part of the Exodus, right? They then sent forward the spies to spy the land of Israel, to report how are we going to enter the land and how are we going to conquer it. And instead, right, those spies said, no, we shouldn't go there at all, and made the entire nation want to abandon going to Israel. And then God, as a punishment, said, okay, I'm going to take you through a death march for 38 years through the wilderness of Sinai, most likely the wilderness of Arabia, and until this entire generation dies out and a new generation is produced, and they are going to be the ones to enter the land. Right? So that was the first thing that happened. Nigzar al Israel b'midbar shelo yikansu la'aretz. Those people in the desert will not live to enter the land. V'harav habayit barishona u'bashniya. And the first and second temple were destroyed. V'nilkeda ir gedola u'bitar shema. And another thing that happened after the destruction of the first temple and the destruction of the second temple was the destruction of a big city called Betar, or Biter, that's what it was really called then. And there were thousands and tens of thousands of Jews. This is after the destruction of the second temple about 50 years later, there was the last stronghold of Jews in Eretz Israel who were fighting for the liberation of Jerusalem. They had a big revolt against the Roman Empire. They came, actually, astonishingly, they came very close to actually succeeding and overthrowing the Roman Empire. However, the Roman Empire, they brought in extra legions from all around the world to quash this revolt, and they completely massacred the whole city of Beitar, killing hundreds of thousands of people in the city. V'haya lahem melech gadol. Right, and this city had a great king. His name was Bar Kochva. This is the revolt of Bar Kochva. V'dimu kol Yisrael ugdolei hachamim shu hamelech hamashiach. And all the Jews at the time, and especially the heads of the Hachamim, most notably Rabbi Akiva was the strongest supporter of this Bar Kochva. They all thought that he is going to reinstitute the kingdom in Jerusalem and be the Mashiach. V'nafal beyad haromim. However, he was killed by the Romans. V'nehergu kulam. And the entire city was massacred. V'ayta tzara gedola kemo hurban Beit HaMikdash. And there was the massacre was so great, it was almost as big or comparable to the destruction of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple. Ubo bayom amuchan lefur'anut, and on the same day, harash Turnus Rofus Harasha et Haichal v'tzibvotav, and on this day, after the destruction of Beitar, they went back to Jerusalem, the Romans, and completely removed every single stone from Jerusalem. They plowed the Temple Mount so that nothing is left of the temple itself. All right? Since then, there were other things that happened also on Tisha B'Av. The expulsion from Spain in 1492 also occurred on Tisha B'Av. The expulsion from Gaza in 2006 also happened on Tisha B'Av. And it's just a day of, we'll call it, the destruction of Jewish Hebrew civilization. That is Tisha B'Av. And that is what we were commemorating last week. And now, in the Mishnah, in Masechet Ta'anit, right, this is the last Mishnah in Masechet Ta'anit, after going through all the destruction and all the things that we mourn. It says, Amar Ban Shimon ben Gamliel. Right, he was the president of the court, actually after the destruction of the temple. It says Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, Lo hayu yamim tovim leIsrael ki chamisha asar be'av uchyom HaKippurim. Right, there are these 2 days in the Hebrew calendar that are considered the happiest days in the Hebrew calendar. Right, one of them is Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, and the other one is the 15th of Av. And what happens on these days, on these 2 days? Shebahen benot Yerushalayim yotzot b'chli lavan she'unin. On these days, the girls of Jerusalem, they go out in white dresses, right? Borrowed dresses, shelo levayesh et mi she'en lo, right? Everyone borrows white dresses from someone else, not their own. This way, nobody is humiliated or embarrassed because maybe they come from a poor family and this one comes from a rich family. So everyone, they lend out dresses to each other so that everybody's dressing the best they can. Right? Uvnot Yerushalayim yotzot v'cholot b'kiramim, and the women, or the girls, they go out and they dance in the vineyards. Ume hayu omrot, and what would they say? Bahur, right, young man, sa'i necha ur'eh, lift up your eyes, stop being stuck in your phone, look around around you, right? Who are you going to choose for yourself as a wife? It says, Al titen einecha banoi, ten einecha b'mishpacha. We're going to get into exactly what are the things that they say later on, and where does this come from? All right, so now the Talmud in Masechet Ta'anit, this is the end of Masechet Ta'anit. This is their discussion. Amar Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, right? This is a quote from the Mishnah. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, לא היו ימים טובים לישראל כ15 באב וכיום הכיפורים. The two happiest days in the Jewish calendar, Yom Kippur and Tu B'Av. Bishlema Yom HaKippurim. Says Yom HaKippurim. Okay, that's simple. That's obvious. Why? Mishum de'id baseliha umhila. Because on this day, the nation is forgiven and atoned for all their sins. So you can't have really any happier day than that. Yom shenitenu bo luchot aharonot. It's also the day that the tablets that were broken and destroyed, right, they were then restored, right? Moshe went up and he sculpted 2 more tablets, and he came down with those tablets. That was on Yom Kippur. So Yom Kippur is understood. Ela 15 B'Av Mahi. However, on the 15th of Av, Tu B'Av, what's so special about Tu B'Av? By the way, what, you see that here? Okay, so let's see. There's a few different opinions. What's so special about Tu B'Av? Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shemuel. Right, Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav Shemuel. Rav Shemuel was the student of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, the composer of the Mishnah, right? He says, Yom Shutru Shevatim Lavo Ze Bazeh. Says, what's so special about the 15th of Av? That's the day that the tribes were allowed to intermarry with each other. Mai Derush. Says, where does he learn this from? Ze hadavar shesiva Adonai livnot Selofhad, right? He says, this is what the daughters of Selofhad were commanded, right? That they have to marry, if you guys can recall, the daughters of Selofhad, they had to marry into their tribe's family in order to keep the plot assigned to Selofhad within their tribe, and so that they don't marry out into another tribe, and then plots of all the 5 daughters of Selofhad would now be redistributed to the other tribes. So he says, on this day, the 15th of Av, is the day that women from one tribe were now, from this day on, allowed to marry men from any other tribe. Meaning there was a special law regarding the daughters of Tzelofhad, whose validity was until they conquered the land and assigned all, it was 14 years into the conquest of Yoshua, where they assigned all the tribes, they get their plot. From this day forward, now anyone could marry from any tribe into any other tribe. So he says this thing that had to do with Benot Zelofchad, this is only for this generation. All right, so Yom Shehutru Shevatim Lavo Ze Bazeh. And this happened on the 15th of Av. So what's so special about this? Any ideas? Why is this such a happy day for Israel? This, anyone hear of Dr. Mordechai Kedar? Dr. Mordechai Kedar, He's a specialist on Arab culture, and he talks about how Palestinians aren't really a nation. They're scattered tribes. And you can see this because they have this ideology called Lam Minha. They're not from us. A girl from Hebron will never marry a man from Shechem, and a girl from Shechem will never marry a man from Jerusalem. Why? They're completely different tribes, right? So what makes a nation is if we allow ourselves to marry, right, a different tribe of people. Tribes marrying into each other constitute a nation. So up until now, we are 12 tribes going in and conquering the land. From this day, the 15th of Av, right, from the 14th year of Joshua's conquest, we now transition from 12 tribes into one nation that consists of 12 tribes, but they have no problem marrying into each other. Amar Rav Yosef, Amar Rav Nachman. Another opinion of Rav Yosef, in the name of Rav Nachman, says what happened on the 15th of Av, Yom Shehutar Shevet Binyamin Lavo Bakahal. Says this is the day that the tribe of Benjamin was now allowed to marry into the rest of the nation, into any of the other tribes. Why would there be an issue with the Benjamites not being able to marry anyone else? Does anyone know? And that's what we're going to spend most of this class discussing, what happened over here. But before we get into that, let's see the other opinions. Amar Bar Bar Hana, Amar Biyo Hanan, Yom Shekanu Bo Mete Midbar, says this is the day that those dying in the desert stopped dying. Meaning, we saw already, what do we commemorate in Tisha B'Av? The first thing is Nigzar al Yisrael b'midbar shelo yikansu la'aretz. The people in the desert were condemned to die in the desert and never enter the land. And then they went on their 38-year death march, right? They reached Tisha B'Av, and until Tu B'Av was the last person who passed away 38 years later. All right, so what's happening here, right? Kalubo Mete Midbar, this is basically when the gezerah of the people dying in the desert and not entering the land finished. From this day on, right, everybody who was alive from Tu B'Av then were those who went on to conquer the land and settle Eretz Israel. The Amar more, right, that he says, Rabbi Yochanan says, Ad shelo kanu mete midbar lo haya dibur im Moshe. Right, until the people of the desert finished dying off, God didn't speak to Moshe for 38 years. Shne'emar, as it says, Vayika asher tamu kol anshe milchama lamut, vaydaber Hashem elai. As it says, when the people finished dying off, then God spoke to me. Okay, so what happens here? Again, we saw one of the things that was a gezerah of Tisha B'Av now came to completion and ended on Tu B'Av. All right? Ula Amar, another opinion, Ula says, Yom shebitel Hoshea ben Elah perosdiot sheoshiv Yarovam ben Nevat ala derachim shelo ya'alu Yisrael laregel. So in the times of King Solomon's son, the kingdom was split into two, right? Yerovam ben Nevat and Rehavam. Rehavam was the son of Shlomo, and Yerovam ben Nevat was his opponent. Yerovam ben Nevat took 10 tribes to himself, made a kingdom Mamlechet Israel. He completely separated the kingdom into two, and Rehavam was the king of Judea. And in order to prevent people from the 10 tribes going to Jerusalem on the holidays, he had people guarding the border between Mamlechet Israel, the kingdom of Israel, and the kingdom of Judah. And so on this day, on Tu B'Av, right, Hoshea ben Elah, he removed these guards. And he says, wherever you want to go, you can go. In effect, kind of now reuniting the two kingdoms, even though they're two separate kingdoms, but you could say they have a free passage between them, kind of like, I'd say, like Canada and America, two separate countries, but any Canadian is able to enter America with no problem. Any American is able to enter Canada with no problem. They can move freely between the two kingdoms. So what does this again have to do? If Tisha B'Av has to do with the dissolving of our civilization, the destruction of Jewish sovereignty, Tu B'Av, what we see is that Tu B'Av really comes to remedy that. Anything that remedied our division is what we celebrate on Tu B'Av. Rav Matana says, Yom shenitenu haruge betar ligvura. Says on this day of Tu B'Av is the day that those massacred in Beitar were finally allowed to be buried. This is, by the way, this is like 3 years later. There was a decree by the Roman Empire after they massacred the city. It was completely closed off. Nobody can go there. They wanted our utter destruction and humiliation. And they completely forbade even burying the dead. It says, on Tu B'Av, that was rectified, and we were finally allowed to go and prepare proper burials for those massacred of Beitar. Amar Rav Matana, he also says, Oto yom shenitenu haruge Beitar ligvura, tiknu biyavne hatov vehametiv. It says on that day that the decree was annulled, the decree not to, or that the dead of Beitar were finally permitted to be buried in Yavne, where the Supreme Court was sitting at the time. They instituted a new beracha, hatov vehametiv, right? God, the good and just, right? And that He does good. Hatov shelo hisrihu vehametiv shenitenu bigvura. Says why? It says Hatov. Why did they say Baruch Hatov? Hatov is that even though it was 3 years later, they didn't. The smell of the corpse wasn't. It didn't go bad. It wasn't a horrible smell. The bodies were somehow preserved. Vehametiv, that they were finally able to bring them to proper burial. All right. This is not very romantic, I have to say. Right? It says, but what is this referring to? The day that the dead of Beitar were finally permitted to be buried, right? When did the situation happen? What caused the situation? Again, we go back to Tisha B'Av. It says, Nilkeda ir gedola uBeitar shema. Right? Beitar was captured on Tisha B'Av and massacred on Tisha B'Av, and they weren't permitted to bury them until Tu B'Av, not even of that year, but the day that they were allowed to finally bring them to burial was Tu B'Av. Rabba v'Rav Yosef the Amret Ravaihu. Rabba and Rav Yosef, they both said what happened else on Tu B'Av. Yom shepasku milichrot esim lema'aracha. This is the day that they stopped chopping down trees to build the siege on Jerusalem. Detanya, as it says, Rabbi Eliezer Hagadol Omer, Rabbi Eliezer Hagadol, he was the teacher of Rabbi Akiva. He says, Mechamisha Asar Be'av, from the 15th of Av and onwards, Tashash Koha Shel Hama. The sun isn't as strong. Really, Tisha B'Av is usually falls close to the summer solstice, the hottest day of the year, the longest day of the year. It says from the 15th of Av and onwards, it's already getting cooler, right? And the trees aren't as dry as previously, so it's harder to cut them down. It says, Velo ayu kurtim etzim lema'aracha. And that's when they stopped cutting down the trees for the siege of Jerusalem. So we see all these different opinions of what Tu B'Av is really about. They're all things that come to remedy, or not just come to remedy, but it's after the effects of Tisha B'Av passed. The things that we're mourning for on Tisha B'Av, they either finished, passed, or are now being reversed and remedied. All right, that is the main idea behind Tu B'Av. Now, what does any of this have to do with romance and the Jewish Valentine's Day? So, in order to understand that, we need to look a little bit more deeper into what happened here with the tribe of Benjamin. All right, the tribe of Benjamin. The story here is very dark. It's a very dark episode of civil war. Maybe one of the worst civil wars ever, at least in Jewish history. And let's see what happened here. Here. We're at the end, the last few chapters of the book of Judges. So after the Torah, after Sefer Devarim, Yehoshua leads the people into Eretz Yisrael. They now spend 14 years in conquest. They divide the land up between the tribes, but we're not yet, we'll call it a proper republic. We're an assembly of tribes, we're a nation, we're not well organized. And it says in these days, right, these are the days of the book of Judges, of Sefer Shoftim, Umelech ein b'Yisrael, and there is no king in Israel. Vahi ish Levi gar b'yarchetei har Ephraim, a man from the tribe of Levi, living in the foothills of Ephraim. Vayikach lo isha pilegesh mi Bethlehem Yehuda, and he takes for himself a concubine from Bethlehem, right south of Jerusalem, north of Efrat, right? There's Bethlehem, and he takes himself a woman from there. V'tizne alav pilagsho, right? And she left him, possibly even had relations with someone else, and she left him. Vatelech me'ito el bet avia, and she left him and went back to her father's house, el bet lechem Yehuda, and she went back to Bethlehem, where she came from. Vatehi sham yamim arba'a hodashim, and she was there for many days, total of 4 months. ויקום אישה וילך אחריה לדבר על ליבה להשיבה. And her husband, right from Har Ephraim, we'll say it's like near Shiloh, Beit El area, right? He's coming down to Bethlehem in order to convince her to come back home with him. Una'aro imo, right? And one of his servants is with him. Vitzemed Hamorim, and they have 2 donkeys. ותביאהו בית אביה, ויראהו אבי הנערה, וישמח לקראתו. Right, and so he's coming to his father-in-law's house. His father-in-law sees him coming, rejoices, he's happy to see him, and comes and he brings him to the house. ויחזק בו חותנו אבי הנערה, and his father-in-law holds on to him, וישב איתו שלושת ימים, and he says, stay here longer. He stays there an extra 3 days. ויאכלו וישתו וילינו שם. All right, and they ate, and they feasted, and they slept there, and they stayed another day. And on the 4th day, he wants to go, and his father-in-law says, "Sa'at li becha pat lechem ve'acharati lechem." First, come, have some breakfast. I'm going to make you a breakfast, and then you could go. Vayeshevu, so they sit down and they eat, and they spend another day, and on the 5th day, they finally want to go. And they get held up until like half the day. They didn't get to go early in the morning, and they eventually left, and they're making their way back from Beit Lechem to Har Ephraim. And on the way, they're passing by, it's already coming to sunset, they're passing by Jerusalem. Hem am Yevus, velo ava ha'ish lalun. Right, all right. So they see the day is coming, it's becoming evening. Lin una hine chanot hayom, lin po v'itab levavecha. Says they're coming to Jerusalem area, Yevus, it's called at the time because it's under the kingdom of Yevus. It hasn't been conquered yet. Vishkamtem ahas, let's settle somewhere here. But they didn't want to settle in Yevus because Yevus is a non-Jewish city. So instead, they went to Giv'ah. Giv'ah is right opposite Jerusalem. Today, it's actually within the boundaries of Jerusalem, northern Jerusalem, and it's part of the tribe of Binyamin. This is Giv'ah of Binyamin, and this is where later on King Saul, the first king of Israel, who was from the tribe of Binyamin, built his palace. Velohav ava ha'ishlanun vayakam vayelech ad nochach Yevus, and he went to around Yevus, Yerushalayim, ve'imot tzemel hamorim, havushim, u'pilagsho imo, right? V'hayom rad me'od, it's already very late in the day when they get there. V'yomer anar el adonav lechanav v'nasura le'ir ha'yevusi hazot v'nanin ba. So his servant says, let's go to this Jebusite city and sleep there, right? Later on, it's going to be Jerusalem. And he says, Lo nasura le'il nochri. We're not going to go to a non-Jewish city. Asher lo mi bnei Israel hena. Because they're not part of our nation. Ve'avarnu ad Giv'ah. We're going to pass Jerusalem, continue a little bit further north, and reach Giv'ah. Vayomer l'na'aro lech v'nikreva be'achad ha'mekomot. We'll go and we'll be in one of these places in Giv'ah, V'lanu b'Giv'ah or Barama, and we will sleep either in Giv'ah or in a Ramah. Ramah is where Ramot is, right on top of Ramot. You have Keber Shmuel Hanavi. It's a little bit further north than Giv'ah, right? That's Ramah. Where Keber Shmuel Hanavi is, that's Ramah. V'ya'avru v'yelchu. So they continued going north past Jerusalem until the sun set, and when the sun set, they reached as far as Giv'ah in Benjamin. So they wanted to sleep there. And he's going to sit down now in the main plaza of the city, hoping to be invited to someone's house. But nobody is inviting them home. Comes an elderly man. He's coming from his day at work in the fields. Right, this guy is also originally from Har Ephraim, where this traveler is from. However, he lives in Giv'ah. ואנשי המקום בני ימיני, and all the people in Giv'ah, they're Benjamites, except for this person from Har Ephraim. וישא עיניו וירא את האיש האורח ברחוב העיר, and he sees this traveler, and he's sitting there in the city center, and he says to him, Ana telech u'me'ayin tavo. He says, where are you going? Where are you coming from? He says, we're passing through from Bethlehem to Har Ephraim, that's where I'm from. וילך עד Bethlehem Yehuda, ואין איש מאסף אותי הביתה, and no one is taking me home. So the guy says, come, stay with me. He brings him to his house. Yeah, I have where for you to put your donkeys and everything. He says, they sit down and they're eating and they're having a nice dinner. And now come the young men of the city. They say, Anshe b'nei Belial. Let's see, be said of the right, behold, men of the city, certain base fellows. What's b'nei Belial? B'nei Belial means corrupted people. People who have no God, have no fear of God. They came and they surrounded the house and they're pounding on the doors, mitdafkim al haderet, v'yomiru el ha'ish ba'al habayit hazaken lemor. And they said to the old man, the owner of the house, and he says, Hotzeh et ha'ish asher ba'el betecha v'neda'enu. He says, bring forth the man that came to your house, that we may know him. Okay, does this sound familiar, this story? Has anyone ever heard this story before or a similar story? Where a visitor comes to someone's house and the other city citizens come, residents come, and say, bring out your guest so we may know him. Does that sound familiar to anybody? This is exactly what happened in Sodom.
Yeah.
What brought about the destruction of Sodom. Very, very similar story. The guy goes out and he says to them, he says, don't do harm, don't do evil. He says, this person came to be my guest. Don't do this wickedness. He says, says, don't rape them. Instead, rape my daughter. I don't know how much better that is, but that's what he offers them. Says, they didn't listen. They took this man's concubine, right? The woman that he went to bring back from Bethlehem. And they knew her, they raped her the entire night until the morning. And as the sun rose, they finished with her and they sent her back. ותבוא האישה לפנות הבוקר ותיפול פתח בית האיש אשר אדוניה שם עד האור. And she came back to the house, right, once they let her go, she came back, she fell at the entrance to the house. והנה האישה פילגשו נופלת פתח הבית, right, she's fallen down at the entrance to the house, וידיה על הסף, and her hand is outstretched to the entrance, to the doorway. And he says, okay, let's go, let's get out of here. ואין עונה, and she doesn't respond. ויקחיה על החמור, and he takes her up, mounts her on the donkey, ויקום האיש וילך למקומו. Right, this ordeal killed her. They literally raped her to death. ויבוא אל ביתו ויקח את המאכלת ויחזק בפילגשו. So he comes home with his dead wife, right? He takes the knife, ויתחיה לעשמיה ל12 נתחים, and he cuts up her body into 12 pieces. וישלחיה בכל גבול ישראל, and he sends out a piece to every tribe. והיה כל הרואה, and anyone who should see, receive this message, receive this piece of his wife, ואמר לא נהייתה ולא נראתה כזאת למיום עלות בני ישראל מארץ מצרים עד היום הזה. Right? All who see it, they see there has never been, we have never seen anything so terrible take place in our nation, among the Jewish people, since the day that we were taken out of Egypt until this day. Simu lachem aleha, right? Pay attention to what happened. Osu v'daberu. Says, what do you suggest we do about this? All right? And this was the trigger of one of our greatest civil wars. ויצאו כל בני ישראל ותקהל העדה כאיש אחד למידן ועד באר שבע וארץ הגלעד אל אדוני המספע. Everyone gathered in the Mitzpah, which is near Ramah, right where Shemuel is actually, and they all come together to figure out what are we going to do. ויסבו פינות כל העם, כל שבטי ישראל, בקהל עם האלוהים. Right, all the tribes of Israel come. 400,000 ish ragli sholef chariv, 400,000 swordsmen coming and marching in the direction of Benjamin. וישמעו בני בנימין כי עלו בני ישראל המצפה. And now the Benjamites hear that they're coming, 400,000 swordsmen coming to fight them. ויאמרו בני ישראל דברו איכה nihita hara'ah hazot. And they said to the Benjamites, tell us, how was this wickedness brought to pass? Dabiru echa nihita hara'ah hazot. Who recognizes this word? Echa. The Chachamim say, kol leshon echa, leshon kina. Any times the Torah says Echa or Ayeka, it's the opening of a lamentation. Megillat Echa. Echa Yasheva Badad, right? It says Echa Nihita Hara'ah Hazot. Anyways, a huge civil war breaks out. Tens, maybe even hundreds of thousands of soldiers died, both from the Benjamites and from the rest of the tribes, right? They tried to give them a chance, say, just give us these Bnei Belial, hand over these people who were responsible for this deed, right, so that we can execute them for the wickedness that they did. But when the Benjamites decided to prefer their wicked people over the unity of the nation, right, that brought about a civil war that caused hundreds of thousands of people to die. And they did actually pretty well, the Benjamites, until they were finally defeated. Let's skip to the end. What happened over here? Once they found, we're not going to go through all the details of the war. ויבואו מנגד לגבעה 10,000 איש בחור. This is one of the third, this is like the third battle already against them. 10,000 people are coming against Giv'ah. מכל ישראל והמלחמה כבדה. It is a very heavy battle. והם לא ידעו כי נוגעת אליהם הרעה. ויגוף אדוני את בנימין לפני ישראל. This is only like on the third attempt of attacking Benjamin that they actually succeed, and the Benjamites are now fleeing the rest of the soldiers. וישחיתו בני ישראל בבנימין ביום ההוא 25,100 איש. And they wiped out on that day 25,100 Benjamites. כל אלה שולף חרב. ויראו בני בנימין כי ניגפו. And the Benjamites see that they're losing the war. ויתנו איש ישראל מקום לבנימין כי בטחו אל העורב אשר שמו אל הגבעה. והעורב החישו. Right? And they have a whole, what's it called? They're sitting in waiting for the rest of them to come, and they wipe out the whole city. והמועד היה לאיש ישראל. Where is it? At the end, there are 600 men that managed to flee. 600 Benjamites that managed to flee and hide out in caves for 4 months. And after 4 months, after the war was over, did they finally go back. And these are like the remaining men from Benjamin who are now able to rebuild the tribe. ויפנו וינוסו המדברה. They fled to the wilderness in Sela Harimon. 600 ish, 600 men. וישבו בסלע רימון 4 חודשים. And they settled there in the caves for 4 months. ואיש ישראל שבו אל בנימין ויקום לפי חרב. And the rest didn't make it. And then ואיש ישראל נשבע במצפה לאמור. Now all the tribes, they finish the war, they come back, and they take an oath. איש ממנו לא ייתן ביתו לבנימין לאישה. Says, we all vow that none of us, and these are all the tribes of Israel, will let our daughters marry into the tribe of Benjamin. ויבוא העם בית אל, וישבו שם עד הערב לפני האלוהים, ויישאו קונם. And they came back to Beit El, and they stayed there until the evening before God, right? Because that's where, between Beit El and Shiloh, that's where we have the Mishkan, right? ויישאו קונם, ויבכו בכי גדול, and they're weeping, ויאמרו, and they say, למה אדוני אלוהי ישראל? Why, God, did this happen to us? להיפקד היום מישראל שבט אחד. That one tribe should now be erased from the nation of Israel. They wake up the next day, right? They build an altar and they bring peace offerings to God. And now they're trying to redeem themselves or redeem the tribe of Benjamin. Benjamin is completely wiped out except for 600 men. They say, why is it that we're wiping out an entire tribe from Israel? ויאמרו בני ישראל, and they said, מי אשר לא עלה בקהל מכל שבטי ישראל אל אדוני? Says, who among all the tribes did not show up to the war? כי השבועה הגדולה הייתה אשר לא עלה אל אדוני המספר לאמור מות ומת. Says, everybody took an oath to partake in this war. So everybody was there. That means everybody also made an oath not to marry their daughters off to Benjamin. And now Benjamin is about to be completely wiped out. And there's no more Benjamin among the tribes of Israel. וינחמו בני ישראל אל בנימין אחיו. Right? They repented. They want to revive Benjamin. ויאמרו נגדע היום שבט אחד מישראל. One of the tribes was cut out. מה נעשה להם לנותרים לנשים? ואנחנו נשבענו באדוני לבלתי תת להם מבנותינו לנשים. It says, see, we have sworn by the Lord that we will not give them our daughters as wives. So, they managed to find 400 women from a city that didn't partake in this oath and marry them off to 400 Benjamites. However, there's still 200 men, right, who are wifeless and have no chance of ever rebuilding their tribe. So what could be done here? So they come up with this plan. This is what we're gonna do. They said, there is this holiday that takes place in Shiloh. It's been going on for centuries already. Okay, this is, say it's a little bit northern of Beit El, Shiloh. He says, go and lie in wait in the vineyards. As the women from Shiloh go out to dance in the fields, actually in the vineyards, and you shall then come out of your hiding spot in the vineyards. וחטפתם לכם איש אשתו מבנות שילה, והלכתם ארץ בנימין. You shall go and catch yourself a wife from these dancing girls in the vineyards and take them home. והיה כי יבואו אבותם ואחיהם לרוב עינינו. And if their fathers and brothers would come and protest, right, we're gonna talk to them. Amarnu aleim hananu otam. It says, let them be. כי לא לקחנו איש אשתו במלחמה, כי לא אתם נתתם להם כעת תאשם. It says, we're doing this. Why? Because we don't want Benjamin to be wiped out from Israel. It says, we all promised that we're not going to give our wives, we're not going to give our daughters to marry into Benjamin. However, there is this holiday that's been in practice for many years now, where the girls go out, the single girls go out and they dance in the vineyards in order to find husbands, right? And we're going to tell the Benjamites to wait there and take for themselves a wife. And this also kind of sounds somewhat brutal. However, when we look into the Gemara again, right? When we look into the Gemara, it says, Shehen benot Yerushalayim, that the girls of Jerusalem would go out on Tu B'Av, right, and borrow clothes, right, to make themselves attractive, right? It says, Benot Yisrael yotzot v'cholot b'keramim, they go out and they start dancing in the vineyards. It says, Tana, mi she'eno isha nifna lesham, anyone who has no wife, he goes to there. It says, Yefefiyot shebahen ma'yu umrot, says, the beautiful among those women, what would they say? Tinu einechem layofi, she'en ha'isha ela layofi. Says, look how beautiful I am, take me as your wife, because everybody wants a beautiful wife. Meyuchasot shebahen ma'hayu umrot. Says, and how do you call it? Those who came from good families, what would they say? Tinu einechem lamishpacha. Says, look into my family. Because right, because everyone wants a wife that has descendants that have a nice ichus to them, right? So everyone has some sort of advantage. Either you look nice or you come from a good family. It says those who were less attractive, what would they say? Take us as your wives, l'shem shamayim, for the sake of the heavens, in order to rebuild the family, to build a bite in Israel. It says, give us some makeup and give us some jewelry, and everything will be okay. So we see that even then, right? What happened here? It says there was a civil war that was triggered by, we'll say, the ugliest form of sexual abuse. It was, we'll say, ugly, bad love, where you just see someone that you like and you take them and you abuse them, right? And that triggered a civil war that brought about the destruction of almost an entire tribe. We'll call this, and what is the remedy to that? Says the remedy was these women, I have a suspicion that they knew what they were getting into. They went out to revive a tribe of Israel, to preserve the unity of the nation. All of Tu B'Av comes to remedy the destruction of Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av, if our civilization was destroyed, right, by Sinat Hinam, right, we call it baseless hatred for one another, right? What's going on over here is Ahavat Hinam. It's like baseless love. In order to unite the nation, right? Whether you're Ashkenazi or Sephardi, whether you're a convert or born Jewish, right? Whether Chiloni or Dati or Haredi, right? You could always look at the different tribes of Israel, right? But when you say Tnu einechem, kum ichem l'shem shamayim, right? You take a wife for the sake of the heavens, in order to build a family, to build a bait in Eretz Israel, right? That is the foundation of building up our civilization. This is the corner or the cornerstone of every single, every family is the cornerstone of the nation. We build up tribes, right? A man and a woman make a family is part of a tribe is part of the nation. And we are only a nation when these different tribes are open to intermarrying with each other. If we don't marry someone because of their background, because of their family, we're saying, you are not part of my nation. And so the remedy to the biggest, and we'll say the darkest episode in Jewish history, or like self-inflicted, right? The destruction of an entire tribe. The remedy to that were those women who went out dancing in the vineyards to be taken as wives to people that they never even met before, people that they don't know who they are. However, they're on a mission to revive the tribe of Benjamin in order to bring about the unity of the Jewish people. And the story ends the same way it opened up. It says, Bayamim ahem, in those days, En Melech B'Israel, there is no king of Israel. Ish hayashar be'enav ya'aseh. What does that mean, that there is no king in Israel? Everyone does as they see fit. Whatever they think is right. And this is the last pasuk in the book of Judges. Right? This is the introduction to the book of Samuel, the kingmaker. Right? Meaning this whole story is what leads up to building the monarchy of Israel, to turning this nation of 12 tribes into a proper republic united under one king. And who was that first king of Israel, this may be most surprising, but that first king of Israel was Shaul from Giv'ah, from the same place that triggered the civil war. So his father maybe was one of the remaining 600 men, and his mother would have been one of those women that that saw herself on a mission to rebuild the nation of the tribe of Benjamin, right? That gave birth to the first king of Israel, or as David HaMelech refers to him, HaMelech HaMashiach. Let's go back to the Talmud. אמר אולה ביראה, אמר רבי אלעזר, עתיד הקדוש ברוך הוא לעשות מחול לצדיקים. It says in the future, God is going to do a special dance for all the tzaddikim, meaning all the tzaddikim, they're going to gather around in a circle and dance. והוא יושב ביניהם בגן עדן, and he sits among them in the Garden of Eden. וכל אחד ואחד מראה באצבעו, and each one points out with his finger, and he says, הוא אומר, ביום ההוא הנה אלוהינו זה קיווינו לו ויושיענו. This is, right, this is the God, or Eloheinu is actually, we learned that Eloheinu could mean a few things. Eloheinu could be our king, could be our judge. Kivinu lo, we anticipated him. Veyoshienu, and he redeemed us. Right? Ze Hashem kivinu lo, this is God. Right? We say God is sitting among us as well. Kadosh Baruch Hu, nagila v'nismecha b'shu'ato. Right? We should be happy, rejoice, and be happy in his redemption. It says in the Mishnah ends, right? B'yom simchat libo, right? It says, Sena ur'ena benot Sion. This is the girls of Zion go out and see benot Sion. This is from the Song of Songs. B'melech shenomo. Ba'atara she'itera lo imo, right? The crown that his mother gave him on his wedding day. B'yom chatunato u'v'yom simchat libo. On his day of rejoice, on his wedding day. They said, B'yom Hatunato, his wedding day, Zematan Torah. That's the day we receive the Torah. The day we receive the Torah is the day the Jewish people married God. Uv'yom Simchat Libo, on the day of his rejoice, Ze Binyan Beit HaMikdash. That is when the Jewish people, after the marriage with God, they build the house, the home of God. Shidbarem Imhera Be'amen. So, if Tisha B'Av is what led to the destruction of the people, destruction of the house, right? Chorban Bayit Rishon, Chorban Bayit Sheni, the exile, the preventing the people from entering the land, right? It's triggered by Sinar Chinam, it's triggered by people displacing God with themselves, right? We call the God Elohim, the Elohim Adam complex. The redemption from that, right, is getting rid of the Bnei Belial, the godless people, and appointing God once again as our king. And we do this by showing Ahavat Hinam between all the different sects of our nation. Talking to people from other sects, other types of people, right? Ashkenazim and Sephardim, not being afraid to get to know each other. Who knows, maybe even finding a proper compatible partner, wife or husband, not being afraid to intermarry with each other. That is the cornerstone of our civilization. And that is what will ultimately lead us to rebuilding the temple. And rebuilding the temple means rebuilding that house, that home of the united nation being united with its God. And that is really the story of Tu B'Av. So it's not just a nice romantic evening. It's a nice romantic evening as the cornerstone of, or a pillar and foundation of being part of the Jewish nation as a whole. Any questions or insights anyone would like to share? Okay. And this is how we go from our darkest period in history, always signified by Tisha B'Av, to our lightest and happiest days, which comes just 1 week later, Tu B'Av. Okay, excellent. So enjoy the rest of your vacation. Enjoy the rest of your Tu B'Av, right? And those of you who aren't in a relationship, well, tonight's the night. Go out and meet someone.
Thank you, Sami.
Right?
Thank you, Sami.
L'Shem Shamayim,
Thank
right?
you.
Just do it L'Shem Shamayim.
Ken.
All right.
Okay.
Erev Tov, everybody.
Erev
Erev
Tov.
Tov.
Tודה
Erev
רבה.
Tov.
Goodbye.
תודה רבה. ביי ביי.
Bye bye.
Bye.
ביי ביי.
Bye.